In the eyes of Ambassador Tahir and his friends, this was just another dull council meeting where yet another primitive species would be admitted. For Tahir and his circle, it was an opportunity to put the newcomers, something called humans, in their place, and remind them that seniority was what truly mattered in the Galactic Council. After all, to the elder species, the Council's decrees were more suggestions than rules. Tahir's purple eyes widened suddenly, the vertical pupils contracting to thin slits, as he watched the council chamber's massive metallic doors part with their characteristic silence. Through the bright entrance walked a figure that made every conversation in their oxygen-breathing alcove stutter to a momentary halt. The human ambassador moved with slow steps across the white reflective floor, his form surprisingly unremarkable, bipedal, roughly 2 meters in height, covered in what appeared to be formal fabric rather than natural scales or fur. Yet something about the way he carried himself made even the Zeprani merchants pause their eternal haggling, and the usually chattering Paloki fell silent, their feathered crests flattening against their heads. The spotlight of pure white light at the speaking platform seemed to grow brighter as the human approached it, casting long shadows across the tiered alcoves where 38 species observed in their respective atmospheric chambers. The nitrogen breathers peered through their yellow-tinted barriers, while the methane-dependent Korvax watched from behind their sealed environment, their tentacles pressed against the transparent walls. Even the aquatic Delphini had risen to the surface of their tank, their sleek forms breaking the water's surface to get a better view. Tahir felt his yellow-furred face shift into a predatory smile as the human finally reached the lectern, adjusting something at his collar, likely a translation device. Tahir's long snout revealed rows of perfectly maintained teeth, a display that would have been threatening on his homeworld, but here served as an expression of superiority. His gaze shifted away from the human, connecting instantly with the other two ambassadors of his circle. Sorek, the green-scaled reptilian from planet Lavar, flicked his forked tongue in acknowledgement, the green scales around his neck frill shifting to a lighter shade, their species equivalent of a smirk. Beside him, Ixo's transparent bipedal form glowed in anticipation, the bioluminescent organs within his Versac body moving in a pattern that Tahir had learned to recognize as mirth. They had been friends for decades, these three, navigating the labyrinthine politics of the Galactic Council together. They had perfected the art of communication through glances alone. A raised ridge above Sorek's eye, a subtle shift in Ixo's internal lighting, the angle of Tahir's ears. They all knew what was coming. They had done this dance dozens of times before. The human cleared his throat, such a primitive sound, Tahir thought, and began to speak. His voice traveled well through the chamber's acoustics, enhanced by the Council's translation systems that rendered his words into 38 different languages simultaneously. Honored President of the Galactic Council, esteemed representatives of the 38-member species, the human began, his tone respectful, almost deferential. I am Ambassador Leonard, representing the human species. I come before you today. That was Tahir's cue. With rehearsed synchronization, all three ambassadors turned their backs to the stage. The external speakers in their section activated with a soft chime, loud enough to be noticed, yet subtle enough to claim plausible deniability. Tahir leaned towards Sorek with exaggerated interest, his voice loud enough to be disruptive without being too obviously rude. Sorek, my dear friend, how is the weather on your homeworld these days? I heard the monsoon season has been particularly intense this cycle. The human's voice faltered, just for a moment. To discuss matters of great importance to... Tahir and his companions exchanged quick glances toward the stage, catching sight of the human ambassador standing frozen at the podium, his hands gripping its edges. They shared discreet laughter, Ixo's body flickering with amusement, while Sorek's tail tapped against the floor in their species' version of a chuckle. Sorek deliberately waited, drawing out the pause until it became uncomfortable, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the human to wonder if he should continue. "As I was saying," Ambassador Leonard attempted to resume, his voice containing a slight edge now. "Humanity's role in the wider galaxy has reached a critical juncture. We have observed the Council's operations, studied your rules, and we believe the time has come to discuss how humanity intends to treat the Council from now on." "Oh, the weather!" Sorek exclaimed suddenly, his voice booming through their alcove speakers. "My friend, you would not believe the variations we've been experiencing. On the northern continent, we've had rainfall like we have not seen before. Absolutely unprecedented. The southern hemisphere, meanwhile, is experiencing the worst drought in 3 decades. The equatorial regions are seeing the typical temperature fluctuations. The meteorologists are beside themselves, trying to explain the atmospheric pressure differentials. Why, just last week, we had a supercell storm system that produced hailstones the size of Gorthak eggs." Tahir struggled to contain his laughter, his shoulders shaking as he pressed a paw to his snout. Ixo's transparent form was practically vibrating with suppressed mirth, his internal organs moving in rapid, erratic patterns that looked like a living constellation having a seizure. The human had stopped speaking entirely now, and they could feel his gaze burning into their backs. "Excuse me," Ambassador Leonard's voice cut through Sorek's meteorological dissertation. "Ambassadors, if you have a problem with my presence here, maybe we could discuss it like adults rather than—" "Oh, Tahir!" Ixo interrupted, his melodious voice traveling perfectly through their alcove speakers, as he turned to face Tahir with exaggerated interest. "Speaking of planetary concerns, how is your homeworld's economy faring? I heard the Proximan credit has risen 0.7% against the Galactic standard in the past cycle. That must be having quite an impact on your export markets." The trio was struggling now, really struggling. Tahir could see Sorek's scales rippling, a sure sign he was about to lose control. Ixo's internal bioluminescence was strobing so rapidly, he looked like a biological disco ball. Tahir himself had to bite down on his own tongue to keep from howling with laughter. This was always the best part, when the new species realized they were being deliberately ignored, but couldn't quite figure out how to respond without seeming undignified. The key was to maintain just enough plausible deniability to make it seem like perhaps they simply hadn't heard or were engaged in genuinely important discussion. "I cannot comprehend why you 3 are doing this," the human said, his voice conveying a different quality now. Not anger, not frustration, but something else. Something that made a small part of Tahir's instincts prick up in warning. "Is this truly how the Galactic Council conducts itself during peace negotiations?" Peace negotiations. Tahir's ear tensed, but he maintained his position, still facing away. This was probably just the humans' attempt to make their admission seem more important than it was. New species always tried to inflate their significance. The human continued, his voice steady and clear. "Particularly curious behavior, I must say, given that the Council lost both its main fleets in Earth space. If I'm not mistaken, your 3 species lost several hundred lives in that operation. So I have to ask, why are you acting like high school bullies in a meeting about the Council's surrender terms after your complete military defeat?" The words hit Tahir like a knife in the heart. His entire body went rigid, fur standing on end as his brain struggled to process what he'd just heard. Lost fleets? Earth space? Military defeat? Surrender terms? As one, the trio spun around to face the human ambassador, their synchronized movement almost comical in its desperation. Tahir's purple eyes were wide with shock, his pupils dilated to black circles. His mind raced, replaying the human's words, searching for some misunderstanding, some translation error, anything that would make this make sense. The Council had indeed lost a few battles recently. But why hadn't they been informed that humans represented that Earth? And surrender? The word was practically archaeological, dragged from historical texts about conflicts so ancient that some species involved had evolved into entirely different forms. His thoughts scattered like startled prey animals. How? When? Why weren't we informed? The sound that broke through his panic wasn't what he expected. It was laughter. Deep, resonating, alien laughter from across the chamber. Tahir's gaze snapped to the presidential alcove where Council President Vrexnil sat, his dozens of head tentacles glowing in warm yellow, the cephalori expression of intense amusement. Around him, other senior council members were displaying their own species' version of mirth. The Quellian ambassador's face was chiming like wind chimes. The Borthan representative's forearm slapped against his carapace in obvious appreciation, and even the usually stoic Mechanari delegate was emanating what could only be described as electronic chuckles. Worse, so much worse, was the reaction from the newer member species alcove. The Paloki, whom Tahir and his friends had subjected to the same treatment just 3 cycles ago when they joined, were trilling with delight, their feathers ruffled in pure joy. The Safrani merchants had stopped all pretense of commerce and were whistling their species' laughter. Even the aquatic Delphini were performing something that looked like synchronized backward somersaults in their tank, their version of hysterical laughter. They were all laughing. At them. At Tahir and his friends who had tormented them with the same juvenile tactics when they had joined the council as new, lesser species. Ixo's transparent form flickered rapidly as he broke the excruciating tension. His voice was low, but traveled clearly through the sudden quiet section of their alcove. Do you truly represent that Earth? The Earth that defeated... Ambassador Leonard turned to face them fully for the first time, and Tahir could now see his expression clearly. It wasn't angry or smug or even particularly satisfied. It was professionally neutral, with just the tiniest hint of amusement at the corners of his eyes. The look of someone who had walked into exactly the situation they had been briefed to expect. Yes, Ambassador Ixo, Leonard replied. I represent Earth. And yes, I am here to discuss the Council's terms of surrender after your attempted invasion of our solar system resulted in the complete destruction of both the 3rd and 5th Armadas. Ixo's voice came out as a whisper, his internal organs dimming to almost nothing as he processed this information. So, you are not here to join the Council as a newly uplifted species. Despite the distance and the acoustic challenges of the chamber, the human somehow heard Ixo's weak voice clearly, probably some form of enhanced audio reception. Tahir's rattled mind noted absently. Exactly, Ambassador Leonard confirmed, a ghost of a smile now visible on his face. We're not here to join. We're here to discuss what happens next, now that the Council has been defeated. Reality crashed down on Tahir like the gravity of a neutron star. They had just spent the last several minutes publicly, deliberately, and thoroughly insulting the representative of a species that had defeated the Galactic Council in military combat, a species that was here to negotiate their surrender. His legs felt weak, his fur was matting with stress hormones, and his diplomatic career, no, his entire life, was flashing before his eyes. We... Tahir stammered, his usual eloquence completely deserting him. We're not feeling well. The atmosphere recyclers in this section must be malfunctioning. We need to step outside for a moment. Without waiting for a response, Tahir grabbed Sorik's arm with one paw and Ixo's translucent appendage with the other, practically dragging his friends toward the back door of their alcove. They stumbled through it into the mercifully empty corridor beyond, the door sealing behind them at once. What have we done? Sorik was the first to speak, his scales shifting through a rapid spectrum of colors that indicated extreme distress. What in the sacred halls of Vorlar have we done? We? Ixo's form flared bright red, his species' color of anger. We? This was your idea, Tahir. You're the one who insisted we put the newcomers in their place, like we always do. My idea? Tahir snarled, his teeth fully bared now in genuine aggression. You're the one who said, and I quote, "It will be hilarious to see another primitive species get flustered. You encouraged this." "I was following your lead," Ixo shot back, changing colors erratically. "You're supposed to be the senior diplomat here. 300 cycles of experience. You're always bragging." "Experience that's worth exactly nothing now," Sorek interjected, his tail lashing. "We've just insulted the victors of a war against two of our main fleets. They destroyed them. Do you understand what that means? The Third Armada alone had over 10,000 ships." "The President set us up," Tahir realized suddenly, his eyes widening. "Vrexnil knew. He knew exactly what was going to happen, and he let us. No, he wanted us to make fools of ourselves." "Of course he did!" Ixo's voice rose to a pitch that made the other two wince. "We've been making his job harder for decades with our little power plays. This was his revenge." "Because we're following the plan," Sorek shot back. "Your species' stupid plan." "How dare you!" Ixo's form flared so bright that the other two had to shield their eyes. "My species was exploring space when your people were still figuring out fire. We know more about diplomacy than your primitive brain could ever comprehend." "Primitive?" Sorek's voice dropped to a dangerous tone. "Your people communicate by flashing lights, like some kind of deep-sea creature. It's a wonder you ever developed language at all." Tahir realized the air was thickening, but the other two were exchanging insults faster than he could intervene. "At least we didn't evolve from reptilians that can't even heat their own blood," Ixo shot back. "No wonder your first instinct is always aggression. And your first instinct is to glow like a malfunctioning beacon," Sorek said. "Very helpful in a crisis." "More helpful than your mother was to your species' gene pool," Ixo snapped. The corridor went silent except for the noise of the ventilation systems. Sorek's scales went pale, and Ixo's organs began to glow. Tahir only watched as the other two seemed about to resort to violence. "What did you say about my mother?" Sorek's voice was contained, but it carried the promise of violence that millions of years of evolution had perfected. "You heard me," Ixo said, his form glowing defiantly in bright red. "Your bloodline is as diluted as your intelligence. It's a wonder you can even—" Sorek lunged, his reptile jaws open, teeth aimed for what passed as Ixo's throat. But Tahir, despite the distance, managed to insert himself between them, his furred hands pushing against Sorek's chest while his tail wrapped around one of Ixo's appendages to hold him back. "Stop it! Stop it, both of you!" Tahir shouted, using the full authority of his voice that could paralyze small prey animals on his homeworld. "This is exactly what they want. We're self-destructing while that human is probably in there negotiating our complete capitulation. Is this how we want to be remembered? As the three idiots who were too busy fighting each other to even try to salvage the situation?" Tahir's breathing was heavy, his chest heaving with the effort of restraining the other two. Slowly, gradually, he stepped back, though his eyes never left the duo. We need to think. We need to fix this," Sorek said finally, his voice rough. "Fix this?" Ixo's voice was bitter. "How exactly do we fix publicly insulting the Earthborn?" "We grovel," Tahir said simply. "We find the human privately. We humiliate ourselves. We apologize until our translation matrices overload. And we hope, we pray to whatever cosmic forces might be listening that he accepts." "Grovel?" Sorek's frill deflated. "You want us to grovel?" "Do you have a better idea?" Tahir challenged. "Because I'm listening. Please, enlighten me with your brilliant alternative where we somehow maintain our dignity while apologizing for treating humanity's ambassador like a child asking to sit at the adults' table." Silence stretched between them. Sorek's scales shifted through several uncertain colors before settling on a resigned gray. "We could claim cultural misunderstanding." "And you think that would work after everything we did?" Tahir's ears flattened. "If we try gaslighting them, we only risk making our situation even worse." They stood in the corridor, three once proud ambassadors reduced to desperate brainstorming. The weight of their mistake pressed down on them like the atmospheric pressure of a gas giant. "So we grovel," Sorek said finally, his voice defeated. "We find the human, we abase ourselves, and we hope for mercy." "It's not much of a plan," Ixo admitted, his inner light dimming to a subdued green. "No," Tahir agreed, his shoulders slumping. "It's not, but it's all we have." He reached for the door control, his paw hesitating just above the sensor. Once they find the human ambassador in private, they would have to face the consequences of their actions. They would have to humble themselves before a species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers. They would have to salvage what they could from the ruins of their diplomatic careers. His paw touched the sensor, and the door leading to the docking bay began to open, making a mechanical noise that sounded like the universe itself sighing at their stupidity. The journey was quick, and soon they reached the outside of the council chamber, a docking bay filled with row after row of diplomatic vessels from across the galaxy. Tahir led the way, and the other two followed. They passed the ornate Quellian black ships, the bulbous organic vessels of the Paloki. Then they saw it. The human ship didn't belong here, not because it was crude or primitive, quite the opposite. Where every other vessel rested on landing struts or docking clamps, the human warship simply floated. 3 meters above its designated parking space, the massive vessel hung in perfect stillness, its hull a dark material that seemed to absorb all and every light. No visible thrusters fired, no anti-gravity generators vibrating, no electromagnetic fields crackled. It simply existed there, suspended, as if gravity was a suggestion it had politely declined. The 3 ambassadors stopped walking simultaneously. Sorek's scales had gone pale green, the color of his species' deepest anxiety. Ixo's internal organs had dimmed to almost nothing, nearly invisible through his transparent skin. Tahir felt his legs trembling. They exchanged a look, no words needed after decades of friendship. Each swallowed hard, the gesture looking different on their varied anatomies, but meaning the same thing. They were completely, utterly, catastrophically out of their depth. Still, they approached. They had no choice. They'd barely gotten within 50 meters when 2 figures emerged from what Tahir hadn't even realized was a ramp until it extended. The human soldiers moved differently than Ambassador Leonard had, more roughly. "Halt!" one soldier said, the individual translation devices conveying their meaning. "State your business." We're here to see Ambassador Leonard," Tahir managed, his usual diplomatic eloquence deserting him entirely. "The ambassador is in a session," the second soldier replied. "Return to the council chamber if you have business." "No, we can't," Sorek started, then stopped. How did one explain that they'd just insulted humanity in front of the entire Galactic Council and were too embarrassed to go back? "We need to apologize," Ixo tried, his form flickering nervously. "We made a terrible mistake and—" "You're the 3 from the meeting," the first soldier said. It wasn't a question. "The ones who tried the dominance display." Tahir's fur stood on end. Even the human soldiers knew. Of course they knew. They'd probably watched the whole thing, probably had it recorded, probably sent it back to Earth already as an example of how pathetic the Council's senior members were. "Please," Tahir said, abandoning all pretense of dignity. "We just need 5 minutes. We'll wait, however long it takes. We'll wait." The soldiers exchanged glances through their opaque helmets, some form of communication passing between them that the 3 ambassadors couldn't intercept. "You can wait over there," the first soldier finally said, pointing to an area near the fuel pumps and cargo containers. "Don't approach the ship again without permission." And so they waited. The docking bay's environmental systems maintained a comfortable temperature for most oxygen-breathing species, but Tahir felt cold. They sat on cargo crates like junior staff members, like interns, like the nothing they'd revealed themselves to be. Through the bay's massive observation windows, they could see the council chamber in the distance, its lights still bright. Inside, Decisions were being made. Surrender terms were being negotiated. The future of 38 species was being determined, and they were sitting outside like misbehaving children sent from the room. "My tail is going numb," Sorek complained after the first hour, shifting position on his crate for the 100th time. "At least you have solid form," Ixo muttered, his translucent body struggling to maintain cohesion on the metal surface. "These crates weren't designed for Versax." Tahir said nothing. His mind kept replaying the moment in the chamber, the humans' words, the laughter of their colleagues. 1 hour passed, and then the second hour passed slower than the first. "Maybe he won't come," Sorek said eventually. "Maybe he'll leave through another exit." "He'll come," Tahir replied. "His ship is here." That thought sat between them like a fourth presence, heavy and uncomfortable. The third hour was almost unbearable, and finally, the door to the council chamber's private exit opened. Ambassador Leonard emerged first, still in the same formal attire he'd worn during the session. 2 soldiers flanked him like shadows, different from the ones guarding the ship, but carrying the same aura of lethality. Leonard was reviewing something on a translucent display that seemed to project from a device on his wrist. Probably the terms of surrender he'd just negotiated for the Council's complete capitulation. He looked up and saw them. Leonard stopped mid-stride, his head tilting slightly. The expression on his face was unreadable, that same neutrality that had made Tahir so uncomfortable in the chamber. The human said something to his guards in their language, too quick for the translator to catch, then resumed walking toward his ship. Tahir shot to his feet, Sorek and Ixo scrambling up behind him. They rushed forward, Tahir taking the lead while trying to maintain some shred of dignity in his gait. They'd gotten within 10 meters when the soldiers raised their weapons, not pointing directly at them, but the message was clear. Tahir dropped immediately into full prostration, his belly touching the cold bay floor. His head pressed down, his arms stretched forward, the position of complete submission his species had used for millennia. Beside him, Sorek coiled into his species' submission posture, his head beneath his tail, scales turned to show the vulnerable underside. Ixo compressed his form until he was almost flat against the floor, his internal organs arranged in the pattern his kind used to show total surrender. "Honored Ambassador," Tahir spoke to the floor, not daring to raise his eyes. "We come before you in shame and disgrace. Our behavior was inexcusable, our actions unforgivable. We insulted you. We insulted your species. We insulted the very concept of diplomatic discourse." "We were fools," Sorek added, his voice muffled by his own coiled body. "Arrogant, stupid fools who forgot the basics of diplomacy." "We throw ourselves on your mercy." Ixo's voice was even weaker, his form so compressed that speaking was difficult. "Whatever punishment you deem fit, we accept. Whatever reparations you demand, we will pay." Silence stretched above them. Tahir could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the cold of the floor seeping through his fur. Still silence. Ixo couldn't bear it. He began to stand, to move closer to Leonard in despair at the lack of response. The sound of weapons being aimed was immediate. Multiple clicks as the soldiers' rifles targeted him. Ixo froze, half raised, his form trembling. Then Leonard sighed. It was such a human sound, so ordinary and tired and almost amused. "I think I know what's happening here," the human said. "And I think violence won't be necessary. Lower your weapons." The soldiers complied immediately, though they remained alert. "Get back to your feet," Leonard continued. "All 3 of you. You look ridiculous down there." Tahir raised his head first, hardly believing what he was hearing. Slowly, carefully, the 3 of them returned to standing positions. Leonard was looking at them, and for the first time his professional mask had cracked slightly. He looked tired, but there was something else. Understanding, perhaps? "You left the meeting," he said. It wasn't accusatory, just observational. Things were decided without your presence. Important things, I'd imagine. We couldn't go back, Sorek admitted. After what we did... I see. Leonard nodded. Well, since we're all here, would you like to come aboard? I have a bottle of whiskey that's been waiting for a special occasion, and I think this qualifies. We can talk, properly, this time. The three ambassadors stared at him. This had to be a trap. Some form of psychological torture. There was no other explanation. We... Tahir stammered. It's not a trick, Leonard said, that ghost of a smile returning. Though I understand your confusion. Come on, my feet are tired and I'd rather sit for this conversation. He turned and walked toward his ship. After a moment of stunned hesitation, the three followed. The ramp to the human ship was wider than it had looked from the outside, accommodating their different physiologies easily. But it was what lay beyond that made them stop in their tracks. The interior was impossible. Where the counselors' ships, even the most advanced ones, showed their technology, cables, panels, displays, interfaces, the human ship's corridors were seamless. The walls, floor, and ceiling flowed into each other without visible joints. Light came from everywhere and nowhere, perfectly even, creating no shadows. The air itself felt different, clean and fresh. Impressive, Sorek whispered, his scales shifting to the purple of awe. We were idiots, Ixo murmured, his form brightening as he took in the technology around them. Complete and utter fools, Tahir agreed, his ears flat against his head. Leonard led them through corridors that seemed to reconfigure themselves as they walked, doors appearing where walls had been moments before. Finally, they arrived at what was clearly a meeting room, though unlike any they'd seen. Instead of a formal table and chairs, there were various seating configurations that seemed to adapt to whoever approached them. Leonard gestured for them to sit, and each found a surface that perfectly accommodated their species' anatomy. Jenkins, Williams, we're good here, Leonard said to the soldiers. Give us the room. The soldiers left without question, the door sealing seamlessly behind them. Leonard moved to what looked like a simple cabinet, which opened at his approach to reveal various containers. He pulled out a bottle filled with amber liquid and a single glass, pouring himself a measure. I'd offer you some, he said, settling into what looked like a regular sofa that somehow supported him perfectly. But without running extensive biological tests, I have no idea if alcohol would kill you, make you drunk, or have no effect at all. Human biochemistry is apparently quite different from most council species. Tahir found himself confused again. They were here, on the human ship, under his complete power. Leonard could do anything to them. Humiliate them, torture them for information, use them as leverage against their species. But instead, he was apologizing for not being able to offer them drinks? I don't understand, Tahir said finally. We insulted you, publicly, and now you're treating us as guests? Sorek and Ixo nodded their agreement, equally baffled. Leonard took a sip of his whiskey, seeming to consider his words. Then his expression shifted to one of understanding. You were set up, he said simply, weren't you? The three ambassadors exchanged glances. The council president knew exactly who I was, what Earth had done, why I was here, Leonard continued. But he didn't tell you. He let you walk into that situation blind, knowing exactly what you do because it's what you always do to new species. Am I right? How did you... Ixo started. Because I've spent the last 3 hours negotiating surrender terms, and I've gotten a pretty good sense of how the council operates, Leonard said, taking another sip. It's all games to them. Power plays, positioning, petty politics. They used me and humanity's victory to humiliate you three, probably because you've been thorns in their sides for decades. Instead of just addressing the problem directly, like adults, they orchestrated that whole scene. He laughed, shaking his head. You know what the really funny part is? Humanity came to space expecting to find enlightened beings. advanced civilizations that had transcended petty squabbles. Maybe terrifying galactic horrors we'd have to fight or negotiate. Instead, we found this. A council that operates like a dysfunctional corporate boardroom crossed with a high school student government. Earth politics looks positively sophisticated by comparison, and trust me, that's saying something about the council that you really don't want to hear. Tahir leaned forward, his diplomatic instincts finally returning. What we don't understand is what happens now. To us, to our species. Will humanity seek reparations from our worlds for your behavior? Will you report this to your superiors? Or worse, Sorek added, his tail twitching nervously. Will Earth's fleet punish us directly for the insult? Leonard actually laughed at that, a genuine sound of amusement. Punish you? For what? Being rude? Having poor diplomatic etiquette? Please, humanity has grown up enough and pragmatic enough to forget your behavior. We've got bigger concerns than 3 ambassadors who tried to pull a power play and failed. He paused, swirling the whiskey in his glass. But since you're already here, and since you seem genuinely apologetic, maybe you could help me understand some things. The offstage stuff. The things humanity should know, but the president and his inner circle would never tell us. You know what I mean. The real dynamics, the actual power structures, the secrets everyone knows but no one discusses officially. The 3 ambassadors exchanged a long look. Tahir saw the same realization dawning in his friend's eyes that was crystallizing in his own mind. This was it. This was their redemption. Not through groveling or reparations, but through something far simpler. Information. The Grorians have been developing space-fold tunnel technology for 50 cycles, Ixo said immediately. They're about 5 cycles from a breakthrough that would make current FTL obsolete. The president species, the cephalori, they're not actually fully aquatic, Sorek added quickly. They can survive in atmosphere for days. They just prefer water because it gives them a tactical advantage in negotiations. Others can't read their body language as well through the distortion. The Quellian shining ships aren't just decorative, Tahir contributed. They're the most advanced AI systems in the galaxy. The Quellians themselves are barely sapient. It's their ships that do all the thinking. And so it went. For the next hour, they spilled everything. Every secret, every hidden alliance, every economic manipulation, every species' real military capability versus their stated one. Leonard sipped his whiskey and occasionally asked clarifying questions, but mostly just listened, absorbing information that would give humanity an insurmountable advantage in future dealings. When they finally exhausted their knowledge, Leonard stood. "Thank you, ambassadors. This has been very educational. I think we can consider the matter of your earlier behavior completely forgotten." He escorted them back to the ramp, that same professional smile on his face. As they descended, Tahir felt a mix of relief and something else, a nagging sensation that he'd missed something important. They stood in the docking bay and watched as the human ship powered up. It rose from its hovering position, ascending smoothly through the bay's atmospheric shield and into space beyond. The entire departure was silent. No engine roar, no thruster fire, just movement that defied everything they thought they knew about physics. "We were set up by the president," Sorek said finally. "But we made things right for our species," Ixo added. "No reparations, no punishment. By sharing the Council's dirty secrets," Tahir finished, the full realization hitting him. Every piece of classified information, every hidden truth. They stood there in the silence as the truth sank in. The president had played them, yes. They'd avoided disaster through their desperate apology, true. But in the end, the only real winners today were the humans. Everyone else, the president, the council, and especially the 3 of them, had just been pieces on a board, moved around for humanity's benefit. "We've been played," Tahir said softly. "All of us. The entire council. And the worst part? Zoric's scales had turned a deep purple of resignation. We brought it upon ourselves. Above them, the stars twinkled through the docking bay's transparent ceiling. Somewhere among them, Earth waited, armed not just with superior technology and undefeated fleets, but now with every secret the Galactic Council had tried to keep hidden. Today, the game had changed, and everyone except the humans had lost.